There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone transform the moment the cameras stop rolling. Johnny Carson witnessed this Jekyll and Hyde routine thousands of times, but 12 celebrities stood out as particularly disturbing. By the time I finish telling you about the last one, you'll understand why Johnny called him truly hateful. And that's coming from a man who rarely said a harsh word about anyone. Jerry Lewis, the comedy genius Carson, called truly hateful. Jerry Lewis was one of America's most successful entertainers, a groundbreaking comedian, actor, director, and humanitarian known for his annual telethons benefiting muscular dystrophy research. His manic energy and physical comedy had made him a global star. Lewis's desperate need for audience approval may have stemmed from a lonely childhood. His parents were vaudeville performers who often left him in the care of relatives. He later described himself as a depressed kid who developed his comedic persona as a defense mechanism to combat feelings of abandonment and inadequacy. Behind the scenes, according to numerous Tonight Show staff accounts, Lewis was also one of the most difficult, demeaning celebrities in Hollywood, a reputation that earned him a special place on Carson's personal blacklist. He's what happens when ego outruns talent, Carson reportedly told a colleague after a particularly troublesome Lewis appearance in the mid-1970s. Unlike some difficult guests who saved their worst behavior for underlings, Lewis reportedly made no secret of his disdain for Carson himself. During one infamous appearance, Lewis repeatedly talked over Carson, hijacked questions intended for other guests, and at one point actually reached over and adjusted Carson's tie without permission, a move that visibly annoyed the normally unflappable host. Johnny hated people touching him without permission, a former producer explained. It was a well-known rule. You don't touch Johnny unless he initiates it. Lewis knew this and did it anyway as a power move. Lewis's treatment of crew members was allegedly even worse. According to several accounts, he would refuse to learn staffers' names, referring to them as "Hey, you," or by their function, camera guy, makeup girl, regardless of their experience or seniority. One particularly disturbing incident occurred when a camera operator reportedly coughed quietly during Lewis's rehearsal. According to multiple witnesses, Lewis stopped everything and launched into a tirade, screaming that the cameraman was a professional who breathes like an amateur, and demanding he be removed from the studio. Jerry screamed at a camera op for breathing loudly, confirmed a floor manager who was present. Not talking, breathing. The poor guy had allergies. What Carson found most objectionable about Lewis was the contrast between his public persona as a tireless champion for children and his private behavior toward people who couldn't benefit his career. The Jekyll and Hyde routine made Johnny's skin crawl, recalled a producer who worked closely with Carson. He'd watched Jerry cry on his telethon about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like they were subhuman. The most profound tragedy in Lewis's life was his relationship with his 6 sons from his first marriage. He was largely estranged from all of them, and most painfully from his youngest, Joseph, who passed away from an overdose in 2009. Lewis publicly disinherited all 6 sons, a final act that cemented a lifetime of family heartbreak. After Lewis's final appearance on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his executive producer simply, "Never again." Though Carson rarely banned guests outright, Lewis joined the small group of celebrities who were effectively blacklisted from the show during its final decade. Years later, when asked about Lewis at a private dinner, Carson reportedly said something that shocked those present with its uncharacteristic harshness. In a town full of phonies, he stands out as truly hateful, and that takes some doing. Were you shocked to learn the truth about Jerry Lewis? Share your thoughts about celebrities whose public image doesn't match their private behavior. But if Lewis's calculated cruelty made Carson's skin crawl, his next nemesis represented something he found even more disturbing. Raw power used to intimidate and threaten. Frank Sinatra, the charming bully Carson couldn't stand. On screen, Frank Sinatra and Johnny Carson appeared to share a cordial, even friendly relationship. The legendary singer would joke, tell stories, and occasionally perform, while Carson played the respectful host. Behind the scenes, however, Carson reportedly harbored a deep dislike for Sinatra, not for his talent, which Carson respected, but for how Old Blue Eyes treated people when he thought no one important was watching. If he didn't sing, he'd be a mob enforcer, Carson once told a friend, according to multiple biographies. And sometimes, I think he was both. A pivotal and traumatic event in Sinatra's life was the 1963 kidnapping of his son, Frank Sinatra Jr. He paid a $240,000 ransom for his son's safe return, and the stress of the ordeal reportedly haunted him for the rest of his life, exacerbating his paranoia and need for control. Sinatra's appearances on The Tonight Show were notorious among crew members for the tension they created. According to longtime staff, Sinatra would arrive with an entourage of up to 8 men who were described as not show business types, more like guys you wouldn't want to meet in an alley. These men would spread through the studio, watching staff and creating an atmosphere one cameraman described as like being under surveillance. Yet Sinatra was also known for quiet acts of immense generosity. When actor Lee J. Cobb suffered a heart attack and couldn't afford his medical bills, Sinatra anonymously paid for everything. He also secretly supported many old friends and crew members who had fallen on hard times, demanding no credit. But what truly disturbed Carson was witnessing how Sinatra treated people he deemed beneath him. During one appearance in the early 1970s, a floor manager made the mistake of giving Sinatra the standard 3 minutes warning before his segment. According to several witnesses, Sinatra grabbed the man by his tie and pulled him close, saying, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager, a Korean War veteran in his 50s, was visibly shaken afterward. When Carson saw this interaction from his office monitor, he nearly canceled the segment. Only the producer's reminder of the ratings Sinatra would bring convinced him to continue. Another source of tension was Sinatra's reliability, or lack thereof. He allegedly canceled appearances last minute multiple times, including once just 2 hours before taping when he was already in the building, but decided he wasn't in the mood. The most revealing moment came during a commercial break when Sinatra made a disparaging comment about a female staff member's appearance, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Carson, breaking his usual professional detachment, coldly responded, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The tension was palpable, with Sinatra visibly surprised that anyone, even Johnny Carson, would challenge him. When the cameras returned, both men maintained their professional facades, but crew members noticed Carson's questions became notably shorter and less engaged. After that appearance, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I don't care what his ratings are. Limit him to once a year maximum." What makes this particularly significant is that Carson rarely involved himself in booking decisions and almost never banned guests outright. For him to restrict Sinatra's appearances spoke volumes about his personal distaste for the singer's behavior. While Sinatra represented the bullying side of celebrity power, Carson's next problematic guest brought pure calculation, the kind of icy manipulation that made Johnny feel like he was interviewing a beautiful machine. Joan Crawford, the Hollywood queen with ice in her veins. Joan Crawford's own childhood was one of extreme poverty and abuse. Born Lucille Fay Le Sueur, she was abandoned by her father, and later alleged that her stepfather had harmed her in ways too terrible to describe. She was forced to work in a laundry, and as a dancer from a young age to survive, experiences which instilled in her a ruthless drive for success and a desperate need for control. When Joan Crawford appeared on The Tonight Show in 1970, viewers saw the gracious Hollywood legend they'd admired for decades. With her perfect posture, immaculate appearance, and practiced charm, Crawford embodied old Hollywood glamour. But according to multiple Tonight Show staff members, Crawford's off-camera behavior revealed a very different person. "She was one of the coldest people I've ever interviewed," Carson reportedly told his biographer years later. "Like talking to a beautiful statue with nothing inside." Crawford's appearance began causing problems before she even arrived at the studio. Her demands included specific lighting requirements so detailed that the show's technical director still had the 4-page memo in his files decades later. "Everything had to be precise," recalled a former producer. "The angle of her chair, the height of Johnny's desk, even the temperature of the studio, exactly 67 degrees, not 66, not 68. When Crawford finally arrived 3 hours before taping, she brought her own makeup team, despite the show having award-winning makeup artists on staff. But what truly revealed Crawford's character was how differently she treated people based on their importance. "She practically curtsied to Johnny," said a stagehand who was present that day. But when a young production assistant accidentally entered her dressing room with water she had requested, Crawford exploded. According to multiple witnesses, Crawford launched into a tirade so vicious that staff members in the hallway froze in shock. She allegedly called the assistant, a 20-year-old woman just starting in the industry, names too terrible to repeat here, and suggested she find work at establishments where incompetence might be considered an asset. The young woman fled in tears, and Crawford demanded she be fired. Carson's producer refused, creating tension that lasted throughout the taping. In a surprising contradiction to this behavior, Crawford was known for personally answering every single piece of fan mail she received, often spending hours a day signing autographs and writing notes. This dedication to her fans was a lifelong practice, suggesting a deep-seated need for adoration from the public, perhaps as a substitute for the love she lacked in her private life. But the most disturbing aspect of Crawford's appearance wasn't just her treatment of staff. It was the calculating way she transformed the moment cameras turned on. She was like a machine pretending to be a woman, one producer recalled. She had rehearsed every answer, every laugh, every spontaneous moment. Nothing was real. During commercial breaks, Crawford would immediately drop her smile and sit in stone-faced silence, not speaking to anyone, then instantly reanimate when the red light came back on. Carson, known for his ability to make guests comfortable, struggled to find any authentic connection with Crawford. After the show, he reportedly told Ed McMahon, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." Years later, when Christina Crawford's memoir revealed Joan's alleged abuse of her adopted children, Carson wasn't surprised. According to close friends, he simply nodded and said, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every word." If Crawford's cold calculation unnerved Carson, his next nemesis represented something he found even more disturbing, an overwhelming ego that recognized no boundaries or formats. Orson Welles, the genius who thought rules were beneath him. Orson Welles appeared on The Tonight Show multiple times during the Carson era, always generating memorable television with his booming voice, larger-than-life presence, and remarkable stories from his storied career. Welles's character was shaped by a childhood of both privilege and tragedy. Hailed as a child prodigy in music and theater, his world shattered when his mother passed when he was 9, and his father, an alcoholic inventor, passed when he was 15. This early loss of his parents left him with a lifelong sense of abandonment and a fierce, sometimes self-destructive, independence. Viewers at home saw a charming, brilliant raconteur, and Carson and his staff saw something else. A man whose ego had grown so enormous that he believed normal rules of television simply didn't apply to him. "Never again," Carson reportedly said after one particularly difficult Welles appearance. "That guy thinks he's still running Rome." The problems typically began before Welles even arrived at the studio. According to Tonight Show writers, Welles routinely dismissed any prepared questions or topics Carson's team had developed. "He told us our questions were pedestrian and obvious," one former writer recalled. "He'd literally crossed them all out and handed back an empty page." This put Carson in the uncomfortable position of having to interview one of cinema's most significant figures with no preparation or framework, a particular challenge given Welles's tendency to launch into lengthy, meandering stories that were difficult to edit for time. An unexpected connection. Welles was a lifelong magic enthusiast and a member of the Society of American Magicians. Johnny Carson was also a skilled amateur magician. This shared passion could have been a point of connection, but Welles's on-air behavior often overshadowed any potential for genuine rapport. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, Welles was scheduled for a 7-minute segment. He stayed on the couch for nearly 25 minutes, ignoring multiple subtle cues from Carson that it was time to wrap up. Johnny had a series of signals he would give guests when time was running short, a director explained. Welles saw them all and just kept talking. "We had to bump 2 other guests entirely." Welles's behavior towards staff was equally dismissive. He reportedly refused to speak directly to production assistants, instead addressing them in the third person, even when they were standing right beside him. "Tell the girl I need more water." Or, "Ask the boy to adjust the light." What particularly irritated Carson, according to those who knew him well, was Welles's habit of treating The Tonight Show as if it were his own personal platform rather than Carson's program. Orson would bring props, change topics without warning, and even attempt to direct camera shots from his seat, a former producer explained. "He once actually stood up and tried to tell our camera operators which angles to use." Johnny was livid. After one particularly challenging appearance, Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." Carson, himself a perfectionist about television production, found Welles's disregard for the medium's constraints especially galling. Though he maintained public respect for Welles's immense contributions to film, privately he began to view him as a cautionary tale of what happens when talent is eclipsed by ego. While Welles represented the challenge of containing an oversized personality, Carson's next difficult guest brought a different problem: unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn hostile. Bette Davis, Hollywood's queen of verbal violence. When Bette Davis appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences saw the legendary actress at her most engaging, telling witty stories in her distinctive voice, elegant even in her later years, and filled with fascinating Hollywood history. Davis's combative nature was forged early. Her father abandoned the family when she was 7, and she developed an intensely close and later famously difficult relationship with her mother. Her career was defined by her willingness to fight studio heads for better roles, a struggle that earned her a reputation as difficult, but also resulted in some of cinema's most iconic female characters. What they didn't see were the moments before and after the red light came on, when Davis reportedly revealed a personality so abrasive that even the unflappable Carson was taken aback. She doesn't need a stage, she needs a courtroom, Carson allegedly told Ed McMahon after one particularly difficult appearance. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without a lawyer present. Davis's first offense, according to multiple Tonight Show staff accounts, was her treatment of other guests. When booked on episodes with multiple celebrities, Davis would often interrupt or talk over them, especially if they were younger performers or women. She would physically turn her back on other guests on the couch, a former talent coordinator recalled. If someone else was telling a story that got laughs, you could see her seething, planning how to regain control. Behind the scenes, Davis's behavior was even more problematic. She reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room before appearances, not unusual for guests of her era, but her alcohol consumption sometimes led to inappropriate comments and behavior. According to female staff members who worked on the show in the 1970s, Davis regularly used language that was offensive in ways that shocked even by the standards of that time. One makeup artist recalled Davis refusing her services, asking instead for someone whose hands don't shake, like they're coming off a 3-day bender. Despite her tough exterior, Davis showed immense vulnerability and kindness in her personal correspondence. During World War II, she and actor John Garfield founded the Hollywood Canteen, a club offering free food and entertainment to servicemen. Davis poured her own money and time into the project, often working there personally, dancing with soldiers and washing dishes. Carson, who generally avoided confrontation, made an exception for Davis when she began berating a cue card holder for being too slow during a rehearsal. Johnny actually stepped in, remembered a production assistant who witnessed the incident. He very quietly told her, "Miss Davis, on this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She was stunned, probably not used to being challenged, but she backed down. What made Davis particularly difficult for Carson was the contrast between her undeniable talent and her treatment of others. Unlike some difficult guests who could be dismissed as talentless, Davis was a genuine legend whose work Carson admired. After her final appearance on the show in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his producer, "That's the last time. Life's too short to spend it being verbally flogged by Bette Davis, no matter how many Oscars she has." While Davis at least directed her barbs at adults who could defend themselves, Carson's next problematic guest brought a different kind of discomfort: behavior toward young women that crossed professional boundaries. Mickey Rooney, the aging child, star with wandering hands. Mickey Rooney was Hollywood royalty, the #1 box office star from 1939 to 1941, and a living connection to the industry's golden age. Rooney's early life was the definition of born in a trunk. He began performing in his parents' vaudeville act at just 17 months old. This relentless work schedule and the immense pressure of being MGM's biggest young star deprived him of a normal childhood and contributed to his later personal and financial struggles, including addiction to gambling and various substances. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic celebrations of an illustrious career. Instead, according to multiple staff accounts, Rooney's visits became notorious for his inappropriate behavior, chaotic energy, and occasional intoxication. He thinks being short gives him license to be a pervert, Carson reportedly told his producer after one particularly problematic appearance in the mid-1970s. Rooney, then in his mid-50s, developed a reputation among female staff members for unwanted touching, suggestive comments, and ignoring professional boundaries. According to multiple accounts, young production assistants would ask to be reassigned when they learned Rooney was booked. He would grab your hand when you brought him water, try to pull you closer, ask if you were married, recalled a former assistant who worked on the show in the late 1970s. If you tried to leave, he'd hold on to your wrist just a little too long. Even more concerning was Rooney's apparent inability to recognize when he'd had too much to drink. According to Tonight Show employees, he appeared visibly intoxicated during at least 3 separate appearances, slurring words and losing his train of thought mid-sentence. In his later years, Rooney became a victim himself, courageously testifying before Congress in 2011 about the elder abuse he suffered suffered at the hands of his stepchildren, who he alleged controlled his finances and isolated him from his friends. This final chapter of his life cast his earlier chaotic behavior in a more tragic light. During one infamous segment in 1977, Rooney began telling an anecdote about Judy Garland that quickly became inappropriate, forcing Carson to cut him off and pivot to a different topic. During the commercial break, Carson reportedly asked his producer, "Is he under the influence, or is this just who he is now?" What made Rooney particularly difficult for Carson was the generational gap in understanding what constituted appropriate behavior. Born in 1920, Rooney came from an era of Hollywood where certain conduct toward women was commonplace, if not condoned. Johnny was no prude, but he had clear lines about professional conduct, explained a director who worked on the show for many years. Rooney seemed genuinely confused when called out on his behavior, like he didn't understand why it was a problem. After one appearance where Rooney made repeated comments about a young actress also appearing on that night's show, Carson took the unusual step of apologizing to her personally after the taping. "I've never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest's behavior," the director recalled. He told her, "That's not how professionals act on my show, and it won't happen again." True to his word, Rooney's appearances became less frequent in the late 1970s and early 1980s, with Carson reportedly insisting on daytime pre-tapings rather than live evening broadcasts when Rooney was booked. While Rooney's behavior created uncomfortable situations, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of difficulty. Demands so extensive and unreasonable, they became legendary among the staff. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva who drove Carson to despair. With her glamorous appearance, distinctive accent, and flirtatious personality, Zsa Zsa Gabor was a Tonight Show favorite who appeared dozens of times during Carson's tenure. Gabor's glamorous persona concealed a harrowing past. Born in Budapest, she and her family lived through the Nazi occupation of Hungary during World War II. They narrowly escaped the country in 1944, an experience of profound loss and terror that she rarely spoke of publicly, but which undoubtedly shaped her tenacious and attention-seeking personality. Viewers saw a charming, over-the-top personality who played up her Hungarian background and many marriages for laughs. Behind the scenes, according to numerous staff accounts, Gabor was one of the most demanding, difficult guests in the show's history. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson reportedly quipped after a particularly exhausting Gabor appearance. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting. Gabor's demands began long before she arrived at the studio. According to former Tonight Show employees, her standard requirements included a specific temperature in her dressing room, 74 degrees, fresh flowers, orchids only, no carnations, a bottle of Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes, her own lighting technician flown in at the show's expense, and no female guests who were younger than 40 booked on the same episode. Her rider read like a parody of celebrity demands, recalled a former talent coordinator. "We thought it was a joke the first time we got it." When these requirements weren't met exactly, Gabor reportedly would refuse to leave her dressing room until the situation was rectified, often delaying taping and throwing off the entire show's schedule. One of the most infamous incidents occurred when Gabor arrived for a taping and discovered the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. According to multiple witnesses, she got into a shouting match with a head makeup artist, demanding someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to purchase the correct product. Johnny actually had to intervene, a former producer remembered. He called her directly and said something like, "Zsa Zsa, honey, you look beautiful already, and we have a show to do. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." Despite her diva reputation, Gabor was known for her love of animals and was a vocal advocate for animal rights. She owned numerous rescue pets and horses, and in a moment of vulnerability, often said she preferred the company of animals to people because they were more loyal. What particularly irked Carson about Gabor's behavior was how it affected the overall production. Other guests would be kept waiting, crew members would have to work overtime, and the show's carefully planned schedule would be thrown into chaos. After one appearance, where Gabor arrived 40 minutes late and then complained about her introduction, Carson reportedly told his executive producer, "Next time she wants to be on, tell her we've renamed the show The Tonight Show, starring Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I'll be happy to be her sidekick." Despite these frustrations, Gabor continued to appear on the show throughout Carson's tenure, a testament to her undeniable entertainment value when the cameras were actually rolling. While Gabor's diva demands created logistical headaches, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of discomfort, unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn a light-hearted interview into an uncomfortable confrontation. Shelley Winters, the unpredictable powder keg. Shelley Winters was a two-time Oscar winner with a career spanning decades, from glamorous roles in her youth to character parts in her later years. On paper, she should have been an ideal Tonight Show guest. Experienced, accomplished, and full of Hollywood stories. In reality, according to those who worked on the show, Winters was one of Carson's most unpredictable and volatile guests. Shell doesn't talk, she detonates, Carson reportedly said after one particularly explosive appearance. Winters' passionate and often chaotic nature was reflected in her personal life. She was a committed civil rights activist who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and was a lifelong member of the Actors Studio, deeply dedicated to the craft of acting. Her apartment was famously cluttered with books and scripts, a testament to a restless and brilliant mind that often couldn't be contained by social norms. Winters became infamous among the show's staff for her inability or unwillingness to adapt to the light, entertainment-focused format of late-night television. Rather than sharing amusing anecdotes or promoting current projects, she would often launch into intense political diatribes or deeply personal revelations that left Carson visibly uncomfortable. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, what began as a simple question about a recent film quickly evolved into Winters delivering a 5-minute uninterrupted monologue about government corruption, leaving Carson struggling to find a way to lightheartedly transition to a commercial. Johnny was a master of controlling conversations, but with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado, recalled a former director. Once she got going, all he could do was wait for her to run out of steam. Winters' unpredictability wasn't limited to her conversational topics. She became known for physical outbursts as well. In one infamous incident on a British talk show, she threw a glass of whiskey in fellow guest Oliver Reed's face after he made inappropriate comments. This reputation for volatility made Tonight Show staff nervous whenever she was booked. "We would actually remove certain items from the set when we knew she was coming," admitted a former stage manager. "Anything that could be thrown or knocked over would mysteriously disappear before her segments." Despite these challenges, what distinguished Winters from some of Carson's other difficult guests was that her behavior seemed to stem from genuine passion rather than malice or ego. She cared deeply about political and social issues and saw every public appearance as an opportunity to address them, regardless of the venue's appropriateness. Carson, while visibly uncomfortable during her more intense moments, maintained a certain respect for Winters' authenticity. After one particularly fiery appearance, where she criticized the Vietnam War, Carson reportedly told his producer, "I may not want to vacation with her, but at least she means every word she says." Nevertheless, Winters' appearances became less frequent in the later years of Carson's tenure, with the host preferring guests whose conversational style complemented rather than challenged the show's format. While Winters' passionate unpredictability created on-air challenges, Carson's next difficult guest represented something he found personally distasteful: extreme political views that targeted vulnerable communities. Jane Russell, the star, whose politics Carson couldn't stomach. Jane Russell was one of Hollywood's most iconic figures of the 1940s and 50s, known for films like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. With her striking beauty and significant place in film history, she seemed like a natural recurring guest for The Tonight Show. Russell's strong conservative and religious beliefs were deeply rooted in her personal life. At 18, she underwent a botched medical procedure that left her unable to have children. This traumatic event profoundly shaped her pro-life stance and led her to found the World Adoption International Fund, an organization that placed over 50,000 children with adoptive families. This act of generosity stands in stark contrast to her reported intolerance in other areas. Yet, after a few appearances in the early 1970s, Russell rarely returned to Carson's couch, a decision that, according to show insiders, stemmed from Carson's discomfort with her increasingly extreme political views and reported treatment of LGBTQ plus staff members. Carson, while personally a moderate Republican for much of his life, maintained a strict policy of keeping The Tonight Show relatively neutral on divisive political issues. Russell, however, reportedly used backstage interactions to express hardline conservative views that Carson found troubling. "Johnny could handle guests having different political opinions," explained a former producer. What bothered him was when those opinions turned into personal attacks on staff members or other guests. According to several accounts, Russell became notorious for making disparaging comments about LGBTQ plus individuals working on the show. During one appearance in the early 1970s, she allegedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to touch her face, demanding a replacement. Even more concerning to Carson was a reported incident involving Rock Hudson. According to a talent coordinator who worked on the show, Russell refused to be booked on the same episode as Hudson, making derogatory comments about his private life, which, though not publicly acknowledged at the time, was known within Hollywood circles. Johnny had many friends in the gay community, including several staff members, the talent coordinator recalled. He was ahead of his time in not tolerating that kind of discrimination on his show. Carson's final breaking point with Russell allegedly came during a 1973 appearance when she made dismissive comments about civil rights legislation during a commercial break. Though not picked up on broadcast microphones, her remarks were overheard by several crew members and reportedly reached Carson's ears. After that appearance, Russell was noticeably absent from The Tonight Show's guest roster for the remainder of Carson's tenure, one of the few clear cases where Carson appears to have personally vetoed future bookings. What made this situation particularly notable was Carson's general reluctance to ban guests outright, especially those with Russell's level of star power and historical significance to Hollywood. For him to take such a definitive stance spoke volumes about how strongly he objected to her behavior. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more shocking stories about Hollywood's dark side that the industry tried to hide for decades. Judy Garland, the fragile phoenix who sang from broken dreams. A true icon of the golden age, Judy Garland was a world-renowned singer and actress, forever immortalized as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Her powerful voice and vulnerable persona endeared her to millions, but her life was a tragic story of exploitation by the studio system, lifelong addiction, and profound personal insecurity. As a teenager at MGM, Garland was forced onto a strict regimen of amphetamines to stay awake for long shooting days and barbiturates to sleep. The studio controlled every aspect of her life, including her diet, effectively institutionalizing the chemical dependency that would plague her for the rest of her life and ultimately lead to her passing from an accidental overdose at age 47. Despite her own immense suffering and fragility, Garland was a fierce and early advocate for civil rights. She actively supported the March on Washington in 1963 and used her celebrity to champion equality at a time when it was risky to do so. This demonstrated a core of strength and conviction that belied her broken public image. During a legendary 1961 concert at Carnegie Hall, often called the greatest night in show business history, Garland was visibly nervous and insecure backstage. Yet on stage, she transformed her vulnerability into a transcendent performance, creating a powerful, almost spiritual connection with her audience, who understood she was singing from a place of genuine pain and resilience. Garland had a deep and complex friendship with Frank Sinatra. They understood each other's demons, and Sinatra often tried to help her, paying for medical treatments and offering support. However, their shared volatility meant their relationship was often as turbulent as it was tender. When Garland appeared on The Tonight Show in her final years, Carson treated her with unusual gentleness, understanding that he was interviewing not just a legend, but a broken bird still trying to fly. "She was the saddest person I ever interviewed," Carson later confided to Ed McMahon. "You could see in her eyes that she knew how it was going to end." Marlon Brando, the rebel with a cause who turned pain into power. Widely considered one of the greatest actors in history, Marlon Brando revolutionized American acting with his raw, naturalistic style in films like A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. He was as famous for his magnetic performances as he was for his rebellious, anti-establishment persona and notoriously difficult on-set behavior. Brando endured a traumatic childhood with an alcoholic mother whom he frequently had to rescue from bars, and a cold, abusive father who told him he would never amount to anything. This instilled in him a deep-seated distrust of authority and a lifelong sympathy for the underdog. The same man who was infamous for refusing to memorize lines and clashing with directors was a deeply committed and courageous political activist. The most famous example was in 1973 when he refused his Best Actor Oscar for The Godfather and instead sent Native American activist Sachin Littlefeather to speak on his behalf, protesting the misrepresentation of Native Americans in film. After the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, a grieving and enraged Brando personally flew to Oakland, California, to meet with leaders of the Black Panther Party. He wanted to understand their perspective and use his fame to draw attention to their cause. A move that put him under FBI surveillance, but showed his willingness to engage directly with controversial issues. The 1990 conviction of his son Christian for manslaughter and the subsequent passing of his daughter Cheyenne by her own hand in 1995 were devastating blows from which Brando never recovered. These family tragedies transformed the public rebel into a private, grieving recluse in his final years, adding a layer of profound sadness to his legacy. When Brando appeared on The Tonight Show in the 1970s, Carson found him fascinating but unpredictable. Marlon could be brilliant or boring, charming or confrontational, Carson recalled. You never knew which version would show up, but you always knew it would be authentic. Lucille Ball, the steel-boned comedienne who built an empire on broken dreams. As the star of I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball became America's most beloved comedienne. Her on-screen persona was that of a zany, accident-prone housewife. In reality, she was a brilliant, iron-willed businesswoman, a pioneer for women in television, and the formidable head of a major Hollywood studio. The ditzy redhead on screen was, in private, a shrewd and meticulous perfectionist. As the co-head of Desilu Productions, with her husband Desi Arnaz, she was involved in every decision. She wasn't just the star, she was the boss. Known for her relentless work ethic and an exacting, sometimes intimidating, demand for professionalism from everyone on her set. In 1953, at the height of her fame, Ball was accused of being a communist by the House Un-American Activities Committee, a charge that could have ended her career. In a moment of extreme vulnerability, Desi Arnaz defended her in front of a live studio audience, ending his speech by saying, "The only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate." The audience's roaring approval saved her career and cemented her place in the hearts of the public. As head of Desilu Studios, Lucille Ball gave the green light to a risky new science fiction show that every other studio had rejected, Star Trek. She personally overruled her board of directors, who thought the show was too expensive and cerebral because she believed in Gene Roddenberry's vision. Without her, the iconic franchise would likely never have existed. Her marriage to Desi Arnaz was the love of her life, but was also fraught with his alcoholism and infidelity, which caused her immense private pain. Their divorce in 1960 was heartbreaking for her, even as she continued to run the massive studio they had built together, a lonely queen reigning over the empire they had founded on a now broken love story. Ball's appearances on The Tonight Show were always professional and polished, but Carson could sense the loneliness beneath her comic mask. "Lucy was always on when she came to see me," Carson observed years later. "I think performing was the only time she felt truly safe." Share this video with someone who loves classic Hollywood history. They need to know the truth behind the glamorous facade. What Carson's blacklist reveals about Hollywood's true nature. Carson's private feelings about these 12 complex figures, 9 difficult guests, and 3 tragic victims offer a rare, unfiltered glimpse into Hollywood's reality behind the carefully maintained facade of glamour and charm. "Johnny saw everything," explained a longtime Tonight Show producer. "For 30 years, every major star had to go through him to reach the American public. He knew who was genuine and who was faking it." What makes Carson's assessments particularly valuable is that he had no reason to exaggerate or invent negative stories. Unlike tabloid journalists or disgruntled employees with axes to grind, Carson was at the absolute pinnacle of the entertainment industry. He had nothing to gain by criticizing these celebrities and everything to lose if his honesty damaged relationships with potential guests. "Johnny wasn't looking to make enemies," noted his former producer. "Just the opposite. He wanted every interview to go smoothly. When he disliked someone, it was because they had made it impossible not to." Carson's unique position, part gatekeeper, part confessor to the stars, gave him an unparalleled perspective on celebrity culture. For 3 decades, stars revealed sides of themselves on his couch that they showed nowhere else, creating a bond of trust that made Carson's private judgments all the more significant. Perhaps most revealing is how Carson distinguished between guests who were merely difficult and those he considered truly problematic. He tolerated eccentricity, nervousness, even moderate ego. Understanding these came with the territory of fame. What he couldn't abide was cruelty, especially towards those with less power. "Johnny had a simple test," recalled his longtime director. "How did they treat the pages, the assistants, the guys working the cameras? That told him everything he needed to know about someone's character." In the years since Carson's passing in 2005, many of his private opinions have been validated by broader revelations about these celebrities. Christina Crawford's allegations about her mother, Joan, reports about Sinatra's connections to organized crime, and stories of Mickey Rooney's inappropriate behavior have all been corroborated by multiple sources. This suggests Carson wasn't just being judgmental. He was recognizing genuine character flaws that Hollywood's publicity machine worked overtime to conceal from the public. The most sobering aspect of Carson's blacklist is how effectively the studio system protected these celebrities, despite their behavior being known to industry insiders. Long before social media and cancel culture, stars could maintain pristine public images while behaving abominably in private, secure in the knowledge that the studios, networks, and publications all had vested interests in maintaining their marketability. Today, one cell phone video could end a career, observed a former Tonight Show writer. Back then, someone could throw a chair at an assistant, and as long as they sold tickets, the story would never leave the building. As we look back on Hollywood's golden age with nostalgia, Carson's unvarnished assessments serve as a valuable reminder that our cultural icons have always been fallible, complicated human beings, sometimes inspiring, sometimes disappointing, and occasionally truly disturbing behind their carefully crafted public personas. Johnny used to say, "The camera doesn't just add 10 pounds. It adds a layer of fiction," recalled his longtime producer. His greatest skill wasn't just interviewing people. It was seeing through that fiction to the truth underneath. These stories break my heart because they show how power, without accountability, corrupts absolutely. Johnny Carson spent 30 years watching Hollywood's finest transform into monsters the moment they thought no one important was watching. If you found these revelations as disturbing as I did, subscribe and ring that bell, because the industry's darkest secrets deserve to be told, and these victims of Hollywood cruelty deserve to be remembered with the truth, not sanitized myths. Subscribe for more shocking Hollywood exposés that the industry desperately wants to keep buried. Your support helps us tell the stories that matter most.